or maybe a little bit, a little terrible person. Okay, it's Christmas time. It's Christmas time. The sermon's going, so that's how we'll start. Apparently, it's Christmas time. I would love to tell you. I always like every year. I'm like, okay, how do I start talking about Christmas? How do I do it? And I love, like, Christmas is very nostalgic. I want to tell you guys, like, my favorite memories of Christmas. I want to tell you guys, like, this, like, amazing story. Like, I want to tell you, like, this is an incredible story about, like, this church service I went to. It was, like, my favorite thing ever. And, like, I learned about Jesus being the reason for the season. Finally, an internal, like, I want to tell you guys that. Or I want to tell you guys about, like, it's like family togetherness. Like the tree and the fireplace and the extended family and, whatever, like singing songs or, drinking hot chocolate. I don't know what people do for Christmas, but whatever. Like, I want to tell you guys about that. I want to tell you guys, even if it was about a gift, if I want to be like, okay, so my grandparents are no longer with us, and we used to do Christmas together with my grandparents. And I want to tell you about, like, this, like, amazing, wonderful, like, nostalgic, sentimental gift that my grandmother gave me, and how it's always meant the world to me. And the fact is, I can't do any of that because I made myself a promise. There's a lot of preachers that will just lie to you during sermons. Lie's a harsh word, but, like, make up stories. Like, there's like here's like a sermon illustration, like, oh, my Uncle Rick did this, but no, you don't have an Uncle Rick. Stop it. But, like, I always said to myself, I'm never gonna lie, I'm never gonna embellish. Like, I'm just gonna tell you guys the truth of whatever it is. And so I gotta tell you, like we went to church as a kid, but, like, I don't remember any of it because it was late and I was tired. And my family did some stuff, but, like, I love my family, but, like, it wasn't like a movie. It didn't seem like it. And, like, my grandparents, as far as gifts go, like, my grandma once gave me The Music Man on VHS, which, if you know me, you know that's the worst present you could possibly give me. She's like, you like music, right? And I'm like, yeah, not that. Like, I'm 11, okay? Like, I'm an 11-year-old boy. I'm not into musical theater. Stop it. Like, I couldn't tell her that because, she's old and she doesn't know better. So instead, what I can tell you is about my Super Nintendo. I was 10. It was 1994. My parents got me a Super Nintendo for Christmas. It was awesome. Like, okay, if you guys are not up with the video games of 30 years ago, just know this was state of the art. This was the greatest. Like, understand the Super Nintendo kind of changed the game. Like, it's still, to this day, I still think it's the best Zelda game. It's one of the best Mario games. Like, the Donkey Kong Country came out in that one. Star Fox came out in that one. The original version of Mario Kart, guys. The first, like, OG Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. Like, this thing was the greatest, and it set up everything that came after. If you've ever liked a Nintendo anything, just know you owe it to the Super Nintendo. And so I got a Super Nintendo for Christmas, and it was awesome, and it was expensive, and I didn't think I was going to get it because it was so expensive. But hey, my parents shelled out a bunch of money for it, and so I ended up with it, and it was awesome. And so that Super Nintendo actually, like, there's no nostalgia here, but I kept that thing forever, man. Like, I took it, I played it in high school. I took it with me to college. This is a totally true story. Like I said, I don't lie. I bought a house in 2006, the same one I live in, and we had no furniture in it, obviously, because, you buy a house and then they don't just give you stuff. So, 30 years of debt, but still. So I got this house, and, like, there's nothing in this house. And so I spend the first night in this house. I don't have a bed. I don't have a couch. I don't have a chair. What I had was a pillow and a blanket, a TV, and a Super Nintendo. That's what I had. And that was my first night in this house. And so, like, I did have the Super Nintendo, and it was awesome, and it was great. And then I traded it a couple years ago for something else better because it's not nostalgic. It's not like I sat around thinking about, like, oh, my parents sure loved me as I'm playing King Griffey Jr. baseball, It's not like, oh, what a wonderful Christmas. Jesus is the reason for the season as I do. No, it's a video game system. My greatest memory as a person with Christmas is a video game system. And I don't know if that's sad or not. I mean, probably. But it does illustrate this. At the end of the day, I'm a preacher who is supposed to tell you things like, Christmas is not about commercialism. Christmas is not about buying presents. Christmas is about Jesus. No, it's not, actually. That's kind of why everybody hates Christmas, or a lot of people hate Christmas. Because as it turns out, Christmas and materialism, Christmas and greed, Christmas and money, they're like this. You really, like, in our culture, you can't separate them. As much as maybe we say we should, you can't. Here's what I mean, okay? My favorite movie this season is It's a Wonderful Life, okay? I am an old man through and through. I love old movies. I love movies from the 50s, 60s, 70s. Like, I just love them. They're so goofy and so wonderful. And so this movie is from 1946. I love this movie. In case you're unfamiliar, I'm going to ruin everything for you. So that movie is about a guy named George Bailey. George Bailey always wanted to see the world and, like, get out of his hometown of Bedford Falls. He doesn't. He gets stuck for a variety of reasons. He ends up getting stuck, living this life he never wants to live. He's got a wife. He's got a bunch of kids. Like, just the kids just keep coming out of the woodwork, and he's all this stuff. And he ends up working at this bank, the savings and loan that, like, his dad had, and he ends up working at this bank. He hates it. He doesn't want to work there. He doesn't want to live there. He wanted to travel the world. He wanted to do anything. Well, one day, the bank loses a bunch of money. The bad guy ends up stealing it, but he doesn't know that. He thinks that, like, his employee and friend just lost it. And the end result of that is that the bank is going to go under, and he's going to go to prison. Okay? So George Bailey looks at his life, and he's like, okay, I don't want to go to prison, and also my life is horrible anyway. I'm just going to kill myself. As an aside, this is Christmas. I just love that, like, in the 40s, they were just like, yeah, suicide. Throw it into a Christmas movie. It'll be fine. Man, we used to be a proper country. So, he's going to kill himself. Chucks himself into the water. And his guardian angel shows up. Pulls him out. And it's this very heartwarming thing. Like, the rest of it is just, it's actually heartwarming because the angel shows him what life would be like without him. He shows him, like, this alternate reality where he actually, wasn't born, or I can't remember, he wasn't born if he had left or whatever. But, all these things happened where all these bad things happened, and none of these good things had happened that he'd been a part of. Right? And then Bedford Falls is just a horrible place because, as it turns out, kindness and him doing nice things and other people doing nice things in return, that was, like, what was holding this little community together. And so he learns that his life has actually been awesome, that it's been great. And at the end of the movie, he's really happy, and he, all these things. And the angel shows him that, like, no man is poor who has friends, is a famous line. And it's just really heartwarming story. And the little girl is like, every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. And that's adorable, and we all love it. And that's the movie that we think that movie is. We think that's the movie because we've edited part of it in our minds out. You see, that movie doesn't work without money. Everything I said is true, but also the only reason George Bailey doesn't go to prison is everybody gives him all their money. And then the savings and loan bank is saved and everybody's happy. It's a Wonderful Life is a movie intentionally designed, intentionally written to teach you and me that we don't need money to be happy. And without copious amounts of money, the movie does not work as a narrative at all. See? Even when we don't want money to be part of Christmas, it is. Even when we don't want materialism to be part of Christmas, it is. You see, I don't want to pretend like we don't live in the world that we live in. It's foolishness. Like, if I sat here and told you, like, money's not about Christmas at all, I would be lying. I would be feeding you guys a line, and you guys would go home and just be like, well, that's cool. Drew just told us something that means nothing to us because, of course, it's about money. Right? We buy presents. We get presents. That's kind of the whole thing, right? Of the kids wake up on the 25th and they want presents. Like, we're doing it here, right? Like, we're buying people presents, right? Like, money is a part of it. And I think when we talk about the fact that, like, lots of people hate Christmas, a lot of people hate the fact that like you turn on the TV and it's like a car commercial where somebody like wakes up on Christmas morning and they've got a Lexus in the driveway with a big bow on it. And I always wonder where they get the bow. I know where they got the Lexus, money laundering in the dealership. But the bow, I don't know where you get that, But we watch these, like we see these commercials and like, it just Black Friday becomes like this national event, and then it's Cyber Monday, and I think there's like a Small Business Saturday somewhere in there, and like we just keep making up new days for you to spend money. And at the end of the day, it's understandable to hate Christmas because of that. So I can't solve that. I can't fix that. I'm really sorry. But what I want to do over the next month is get you to stop hating Christmas by, instead of focusing on what our culture does, by simply focusing on what the Bible story is. And at the end of the day, what's ironic about Christmas in our culture and Christmas in the Bible is while Christmas in our culture is kind of interwoven entirely like a pretzel with money, the Bible is entirely different. In fact, it's not just not materialistic. Like, it is not materialistic, but it's actually kind of anti-materialistic. It isn't just something that is not promoting like a commercialism or you have to spend all your money and all of this. It's not just that. The biblical story actually teaches against it. Here's what I mean. We might not think of it like this, and you might think it's not overly helpful to think about this, but I think it's helpful to think. Every story in the Bible that you're going to hear related to Christmas can be categorized one of two ways, okay? It's not all just one thing. It's two things, okay? So we have a whole pile of stories, a whole bunch of Bible verses, things like that are about, okay, God sends his son to be born. God becomes a person, right? Like that's what you have. Like, that's all John 1. That is, the angel shows up to talk to Mary. The angel shows up to Joseph to be like, no, like an angel did show up with Mary and you should listen to her. You have the whole Bethlehem story. There's no room at the inn. All of that. Like, we're familiar with the Christmas stories. That's all like God sends his son to be born. God becomes a person. That's all of that. But that's not all that the Christmas story is. For better or worse, the Christmas story is also about people discovering and reacting to the fact that God has become a person. So we have like the angels and the talking to the shepherds, right? That story is about, it's not about Jesus being born as much as it's about these people discovering that Jesus has been born and then reacting to it. Or the wise men. The wise men, right? The magi from, far lands off, and they come with all the gifts and stuff. Like that's a whole thing. That's not a story about Jesus being born. It's a story about, our reaction to Jesus being born. Or their reaction, I suppose. There's the Herod story. It's a terrible story. I mean, like we have to talk about it because it's there, but King Herod tries to kill Jesus. He doesn't, but he kills a bunch of other children Jesus' age. It's a horrible thing, right? But that is, again, it's part of the Christmas story because it is part of people reacting to the fact that Jesus is born. So everything in our stories of Christmas, everything that you might hear in a church service, everything I'm going to preach about for the next month, everything like that, it can be categorized as God becomes a person, God sends his son, however you want to word that. And then people react to that information. You might think it's like, well, why are you splitting those hairs? Well, the reason is because when you do that, when you split it out like that, and you put it into two camps, what you see is one of the through lines in both camps is anti-materialism, is the opposite of materialism. Here's what I mean. Let's do bucket number 2. We put them in these two buckets. Bucket number 2, the reaction, okay? This is the first thing we read in the Bible about anybody at all knowing that Jesus has been born. The very first people to discover, to learn that Jesus has been born, we read about it in Luke chapter 2. This is what we read. It says, that night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified, but the angel reassured them. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger." Cool. You've heard that before. And probably, if you've listened to me, you probably heard me talk a whole lot about that, like, it's good news for everybody, and what that means, and how we should, the gospel by definition needs to be a good news for everybody, or else it's not the gospel, and we should always remember that, right? That's what I usually do with this passage, and probably what I'll do again at some point. But there's a part of this story that's really fascinating about the shepherds. You probably have thought about the fact, because somebody has probably told you in a Christmas sermon at some point, that shepherds were working class, blue collar people. These are people living paycheck to paycheck. These are people who, if they don't show up to work, they do not get paid. These are not salaried positions. Okay? Like, you didn't go to college to take care of sheep. That's not what this is. These are regular, blue collar, working class people. You may have also, if you remember previous sermons or things you might have heard, you may also recognize that the reason is because being a shepherd is wildly dangerous. Like, when you're protecting the sheep as a shepherd, you realize what they're protecting them against, right? It's not puppies. Like, it's not kittens. No, like, there's bears and stuff, guys. Like the big cats, like the Bible talks about lions existing back then. Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like, there's a lot. Come on, I'm not gonna say it. Oh my, there it is. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Okay, got that out of the way. It's dangerous. There's like wolves. There's all this stuff, right? Like, for you to, like, Jesus talks about how like Jesus uses shepherding as an illustration, and he says, like, the shepherd lays down his life for a sheep. That's literal. That's a literal thing. Like, your job is to defend the sheep even if you die. Well, that's not a thing most people want to do, right? It's not really like valued work. It's the kind of work you give to the people who don't have other work. And I got to tell you, what's interesting about this is these are shepherds that are working the flocks, not theirs. They're hired people. At night, that's the most dangerous, because they don't have electricity, guys. They don't have flashlights. They take their dogs on a walk and they see a skunk, they're just going to have to run into it because they don't have a flashlight. It's the way the world works back then, right? Like, so it's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing being that kind of, a worker. What I'm saying is they're poor and they don't have a lot of options, or else they wouldn't be here. This is really important because you'll notice something. The angel told them how to recognize the baby Jesus. But you'll notice that the angel did not tell them something else. The angel never said, "Go look for him." You notice that? Like, I just read the passage. I don't read, "Go look for him," guys. The angel assumes they'll go look for him on their own. Now, why would you make that assumption? Well, a lot of reasons, but chiefly, maybe most practically, there's this. These are men who are totally willing to, in the middle of their shift at work, just walk off. No, really. That's what they do. There's an alternate reading of this story where they get back to their sheep after going to Bethlehem. They're like, "Oh, they're all gone. Now what?" Like, that was the risk they were running. The sheep could wander off. Somebody could come eat them, whatever. They have a job to do, and they just wander off in the middle of it to go look for this baby. You see, Jesus talks about this later on in his ministry, that it's harder for wealthy people to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the reason, like the event that he's talking about is a man who doesn't want to give up all his stuff to follow Jesus. Jesus puts it like this: it's harder the more you have to focus on God. But see, these men had nothing. They had nothing to lose, so who cares? Oh no, you want to fire me from this horrible, dangerous job? Oh no. They're treating this like a 16-year-old treats a McDonald's job. Oh no, I got it wrong. I work at Subway. Oh, I'm going to tell your manager, go for it. I don't care. I am 16. You think this job is like a thing I care about? Come on. Come on. You see, this story only works if it's poor people who don't care about losing their job. It only works that way. If other people are told about Jesus and they're in the middle of their job and they need to keep their job because it's very important to them, well, they would not go and look. Because at the end of the day, the more you have to give up, the harder it is to focus on God. The shepherds have nothing to lose. They're poor. They are the perfect candidates to hear about Jesus for the first time. And it works. They go see Jesus. They celebrate. They worship. They tell everybody else. They wake people up. Like it's what they do. It's beautiful. And it's all predicated on the fact that these are poor people with nothing to lose to hold them back. This is not just a story that's like, oh, it's not. This is against materialism because it only works with poor people. But that's only one bucket. Far more provocative, I think, is the first bucket of, God becoming a person and, being born in the world. Because there's actually a part of the Christmas story that should be part of the Christmas story, and we never ever say it is, but it should be, because it is in fact about the birth of Jesus or adjacent kinds of things. This is what we read once again in the Gospel according to Luke, right after all the shepherd stuff. This is what we read. It says, 8 days later, when the baby was circumcised, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel even before he was conceived. Then it was time for their purification offering, as required by the law of Moses after the birth of a child. So his parents took him to Jerusalem and present him to the Lord. The law of the Lord says if a woman's first child is a boy, he must be dedicated to the Lord. So they offered the sacrifice required in the law of the Lord, either a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. I will forgive you for not recognizing the crazy massive significance of that passage. You're not ancient Jewish people, and while I've shared this with you before, I say a lot of stuff it's hard to remember. Here we go. In the law of Moses, when a child was born, you were to give a sacrifice for the child. The normal sacrifice was a lamb. That lamb, there's a lot of meaning and significance behind it, but also it's an affordable option. Okay, it's not like we're not talking like a whole cow or a whole like flock of anything. It's like a little baby lamb. Who cares? It's an affordable option for like 99% of the population. But see, the law understood that there were some people that were in that 1% at the bottom, and so they gave, say, I don't know, a social safety net. I don't know. We could call it even, I don't know, welfare, a welfare system for very, very poor people, that you are not barred from the temple. You are not barred from knowing God. If you cannot afford a lamb, just give 2 birds. Now, here's why this is great. Later on in Jesus' ministry, he uses as an illustration the relative value of birds, and he basically says, yeah, they're totally worthless. They mean nothing. Pennies is all these birds are worth. In other words, the law assumes that in the extreme cases where people can't afford a few dollars to honor God with their child, well, here's a pennies option. Here's why that's massively important for a couple of reasons. First of all, you parents know this better than anybody. I've seen you guys. I've seen you guys with your kids. I've never met parents that don't want the best for their kids. I've never met parents who don't want at least something good for their kids. I've also never met parents who, are not horribly embarrassed when they can't do that. There is no world where in a public setting you are offering a sacrifice, where you come with 2 birds instead of a lamb, that you are not dying inside of embarrassment and of shame because you have not provided the most basic need for your child. The most basic spiritual need for your child on day 8. You had 9 months to save up for this. And you can't do it. No one wanted this. This would have been horrifying. I dare say because of this, you would almost never see it except in the most extreme hardship cases. And Joseph and Mary took Jesus to the temple as the most extreme hardship case and made their offering. Jesus was born to people on welfare. Jesus was born to people who couldn't do the things everybody else does. Jesus did not grow up with a standard of living like we might expect. And God's fine with it. In fact, God's not just fine with it. Of all the people on the earth, living and otherwise, right? Like, we have no idea. As an aside, we have no real idea why then. Like, we've had some ideas about, like, well, the Romans, and they've got roads, and they can spread, and all. Okay, maybe. But what we know is that God had in mind 2 parents for Jesus, for himself, really, but for Jesus. And out of all the people that had ever lived before and all the people that lived since and all the people that were alive at that time, he chose those 2 people, and they just so happened to be that poor. It's not just that he was fine with it. It's exactly what he wanted. And now the question has to be asked, why? Why is this what God did? Why is this the Christmas story? And the answer is twofold. The first one is somewhat of a logical thing, okay? Look, let's just take a step back and think about what money is. Money's a thing we made up one day. We know when. About 2,500 years ago, there was a culture that said, we should make coins. And everybody's like, what a good idea. And then everybody followed suit. That's it. Look, I don't know how long humans have been around. I got some pretty good ideas. I think Graham Hancock is on the money. If you watch Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, there's a plug. But even if he's wrong, the most conservative estimates of how long human civilization has been around has been about 10 to 12,000 years. What that means is we were doing great without money far longer than we've had money. Why would God care about a thing that we just made up like yesterday to him? You might as well ask, well, why is God fine living in a world without hot dogs? Why is God total? Like, they didn't have hot dogs back then. Why not be born when there's hot dogs? They're delicious. A little bit of mustard, sauerkraut. Why didn't Jesus want to play basketball? That was invented 100 years ago. Why not be born in a world where Jesus could play basketball? It's a thing we just made up. We need to understand that money is a thing we just made up one day. As much relative value as we give to it, it's literally just a thing we made up. To the God of the universe, it's nothing. He would never have looked at Mary and Joseph and been like, how much cash they got? That would have been like, how faithful are they? How loving are they? How can they provide, how can they raise a child in faith and peace and love? Jesus is who Jesus is because his parents raised him to be that way. That's what he was looking for, not money. And anyway, there's a theological reason anyway. Here's a psalm, Psalm 24. The whole thing. It says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. God owns everything anyway. What's it matter? Right? Like, guys, owning anything, including like your own body and soul, I know we don't like thinking about this because it gets kind of creepy and the implications are not great, but you don't belong to yourself. You belong to God. And that should impact the way you view yourself and your decision making. You do not belong to yourself. Nothing you own belongs to you. It's all God's. All of it. And that should make some decisions about how we spend and what we do. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Look, at the end of the day, like, Jesus is born. It's like, well, my parents don't have a lot, but like everything's mine, so who cares? At the end of the day, this story it's against materialism. And look, I'm not saying don't buy presents. Like, that would be ridiculous, okay? Like, it's like people who are like, oh, I don't celebrate birthdays. It's like, don't be a weirdo. Okay, like, do Christmas, live your life, right? But what we have to understand is that the story in the scriptures, like, what we as Christians are meant to do with this story is not just like put up a tree and buy presents. We are meant to look at the reality of the world. And the reality is this: blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That the more we have, the more difficult it is. The more we have to lose and give up, the more difficult it is to focus on God. Because ultimately, the God of this universe, everything's his, and everything includes you and me. The Christmas story is the story of God entering into a world he already owns, where everything is already his, and inviting those who will listen to ask some tough questions. Like, what do I even want out of life? In the short time I have here, do I really just want to accumulate stuff? What do I want out of life? In the time that I'm here, what is going to make me actually happy and bring me peace? If the one who made everything lived a life in poverty, and that wasn't just fine, it was the plan, then what am I doing? What is he missing what is he doing that maybe I'm missing? If the shepherds can only encounter Jesus because they have so little holding them back that they could just walk off the job and go, what would be holding me back if Jesus was born, 2 towns over? You see, the Christmas story is supposed to give us self-reflection of what our values are. No, we don't just like give all of our money away and become homeless drifters. That's not what God wants. Stop it. Every now and then, like in the church history, people are like, that's what God wants. It's probably not. Stop it. Different conversation, different sermon. We're not saying, what we're saying is we live in a world that is functionally different than the world that God made. We live in a world that has values that are different. And as Christians, we are called to align our values with God's values. Not the world's values, not the values we want in our heads, but our values. God's values. You know what I mean. This morning, when our first week of our series called Stop Hating Christmas. The next 3 weeks after this, we're going to find reasons why people hate Christmas. And I'm going to give you a hint. None of them are in the Bible. They're all just stuff we've done to this. And in fact, the Bible is sort of the antidote for that. This morning, as we consider the fact that God lives an impoverished life, that the shepherds also were impoverished, that the world all belongs to God anyway. This time of year, we can choose to have different values. We can choose to have a different Christmas. And we don't have to have it about money or possessions or wealth at all. Instead, we can be people who understand Christ. Our first lesson from You Stop Hating Christmas is this: the God who owns everything was born to live with us, so we need absolutely nothing else. The God who owns everything was born to live with us, so we need absolutely nothing else. We're going to sing a song. And an invitation, if you want to get baptized, you should. If you want to join the church, you should. If you have questions about those things, we should talk. And other than that, let's sing a song.